Welcome to Better System Trader, the podcast to help systematic traders of all levels improve their trading. We'll give you loads of expert tips and practical advice on system design and validation, money management, trading psychology, and many other topics. Whether you're just starting out or a savvy systematic trader, we're here to help you improve your trading and find more success. This is Better System Trader with your host, Andrew Swanscott.
Hi there, welcome to the Better System Trader podcast. Glad you could join us today. This podcast episode actually made me think back to the very first computer I bought in my high school days. So we're talking about, I guess, the mid-1980s when computers were still relatively new. And my first computer was a Commodore 64, which my parents bought me. But the first computer I actually bought myself was a pretty serious computer at the time. I think it cost me maybe $3,000 or $4,000, which back then was quite a bit of money. And this computer, funnily enough, only had a fraction of the power that we have in our mobile phones today. But back then, it was one of the fastest you could get. And this computer had a special switch on the front of the case. It was called the turbo switch. And I'm not exactly sure how it worked, but when some programs were running slow, I could flick the turbo switch on and it would accelerate the performance of the computer instantly. And I was thinking, well, wouldn't it be great if we could all have a turbo switch for trading where we could just flick the switch instantly, boosting our performance? Wouldn't that be awesome? Well, I don't think such a switch exists, unfortunately, but there are definitely some things we can do to accelerate our performance. And that's exactly what we're discussing today, or in this podcast episode, with our special guest and the leading performance coach, Steve Ward. Now, Steve has over 25 years of teaching, coaching, and training experience, and he works with traders, fund managers, and banking professionals across the globe. He helps them to improve their decision-making, risk-taking, and ability to achieve and sustain high performance. Now, Steve's work is focused on delivering evidence-based practical strategies and tactics, and in this podcast episode, we discuss a number of performance accelerators in trading. And here's just some of the things you'll hear us discuss today. 1, the key factors that can accelerate trading performance. We also talk about why the J-curve is so important for developing traders and how to shortcut the process to profitability. Steve also shares how the best traders manage the short-term discomforts of trading to achieve long-term gains. And he also shares with us why suppressing emotions in trading can be like trying to hold a beach ball underwater and how to improve our behavioral flexibility for higher performance. We also talk about how situational awareness training used by the US Marines can improve our trading abilities, tips to functioning at our best in a world of hyper distractions, plus a whole lot more. So let's jump over now to my chat with Steve Ward. Hi, Steve. Welcome to the show. It's really great to have you here today.
Yeah, hi Andrew. Thanks for inviting me. Good to be here.
Yeah, so let's get to know you a little bit better first. So for those who may not know you or your work yet, can you share with us a little bit about your background? What is it that you do now and what kind of led up to that?
Yeah, sure. I'll start. I'll go chronological. I'll go from the past. So many years ago, my first kind of work in this area was as a sports psychology coach. So I spent a number of years working with athletes and teams in over 30 different sports all over the globe. And really out of that had a very strong interest in working with action and adventure athletes, the kind of the extreme sports guys. That really interested me and the sort of the real hardened endurance people. So I was doing a lot of that work. Was doing a bit of work in corporations around kind of, risk-taking, decision-making, which was quite interesting. And then really into the trading world was quite random. It was 2005 and I'd met somebody on a course I was running. They were a delegate and I was leading the course, a sports psychology course. And it just turned out they happened to be the head of performance for a very large prop trading group, global prop trading group. So through that, he basically asked me, do you want to come and try some of this stuff? I really like it. It's kind of very practical, very easy to kind of use and learn. Would I come and try it with his traders in London? So I knew nothing really about trading at that time, but it sounded pretty interesting. Obviously, high performance, risk taking, decision making, they're kind of things that really interest me. So I went along. It was non-farm payrolls day. in March 2005. Walked onto the trading floor, kind of get a bit of a flavour. Yeah, I mean, it was really interesting. It was a countdown from the analyst, kind of it went from very noisy to exceptionally quiet to exceptionally noisy, whole range of emotions. And then basically after, we did some pilot stuff, some coaching and some workshops. The traders really loved it. It was really helpful for them. So I ended up spending a lot of time there for about a year. And then really it's been osmosis just over the years. All through that, just more and more demand from prop trading groups, banks, hedge funds, investment firms, commodities trading houses, just all through word of mouth, really. And it's just grown and grown and grown. So probably the Winter Olympics 2006 was probably the last piece of sports work I did full on. And since then it's been sort of 99% of my work now is trading, investing, banking. It's coaching, there's training, there's consultancy. We do all sorts of testing and research with clients all over the world. So it's an amazing job to have.
Yeah. So obviously, then there's some types of parallels in performance amongst sportsmen and women and trading. But is that kind of a smooth transition between the two, or did you find that you had to kind of adjust a little bit to apply your sports techniques to traders?
Yeah, it was. What it did, I think, is it gave me a credible in. So it allowed me to, I guess, have some tools that were proven and with people performing at a high level. So it allowed me entry with relatively low resistance. But what I learned early on was two things. One is that trading has a whole language of its own. I mean, it is like learning, as you all know, a foreign language. So, when people are about, even long, short, all this kind of stuff, let alone the markets, the products, and, so there was that to learn. So I did that by basically enrolling on the graduate training course for the company that was doing the work. So I kind of learned how to trade myself in their style, and that was really helpful. And then the other key thing that's different in trading, obviously, is trading is very much a cognitive activity. Sport is very largely a body activity. The body's leading and the mind supporting. Whereas obviously in trading, it's probably slightly the other way around, where the mind's leading, the body's in both they're working together. But if we had to kind of go one way or the other, I say sport is more physical and the mind is enabling that. And in trading and investing, I think, for most people, it's much more of a cognitive activity, and the body, which is a big part of that, is supporting that. So they're both mind body, but with a slightly different inflection. So I think for me, just a lot of study and research and training in behavioral finance was useful, behavioral economics, neuroeconomics, neuroscience. So a lot more of the brain stuff really was key for me. And that's, in the last, 14 years I've been working with traders, that's probably where I've spent an increasing amount of my time, is in those kind of areas, as well as also the physiology. But so I think it gave me probably 30 to 40% of what I needed. And then the rest of it, over the last 14 years.
Yeah. So obviously you've worked with a lot of traders and studied a lot of traders over those 14 years, and no doubt you've seen the successes and the failures. And there are probably quite a few factors which determine the level of a success that a trader can experience. But over your work with traders, have you found there are some particularly important factors behind consistently successful traders?
Well, I think, there are a few, and there's not a magic formula. So, that's something I have to kind of keep reminding myself and other people, and that's true actually in all areas of high performance. There are no 7 steps, 5 steps, magic formula things. It doesn't work that way. So I think you've got a combination of factors. So I think from the people I've seen do the best, there's got to be something about trading that kind of hooks you in, that's kind of, really engages you in some way. And that could be, for some people, maybe it's more money, lifestyle, perhaps, but I don't see that with many of my highest performing clients. I think there's a challenge, there's a puzzle, there's a game kind of mentality. I think it's much more about, here's kind of a really complicated challenge that's really engaging, and I like that. Or even maybe it's just a passion for the markets or for how markets move the world. But I think there's got to be something to kind of get you into it that you kind of in some way finding engaging. So I think that's really key, because as we know in trading, there's lots of times when you're not going to be making money. It's going to be pretty tough and dismal. So if you haven't got something that engages you other than that, I think it's pretty tough. I think resiliency. So I think the ability to keep going, so almost like endurance toughness, keeping going for long enough, and dealing with the highs and the lows that it brings, I think is probably one of the most important skills. So even if you enjoy it, we can all enjoy something, but if we're getting these highs and lows and we can't endure that, then that's pretty tough. So I think that's definitely a key piece. And within that, I think people's willingness to tolerate discomfort, how much discomfort can you tolerate both in the moment and over time, is a big factor. And the mediator of how much discomfort I can tolerate is really how committed I am to the cause. So, if you really want to be successful and it's really meaningful for you and there's some purpose to that, then that I think is a big driver that gets you through the time when it's uncomfortable. And then I think probably alongside that, I would say there's something around just maybe a set of psychological skills which basically enable you to, again, at the highs and the lows particularly, but just in general, kind of keep yourself focused on doing what you need to do. I think we are all aware in trading that conceptually most of it is pretty straightforward. So it's not that we don't understand what we've got to do. It's just that when there is risk, uncertainty, consequences, ambiguity, volatility all thrown into the mix, it's quite difficult to do that. So I think being able to kind of manage your kind of, your inner environment, your thoughts, feelings, the emotions, the impulses, the urges, if you can do that well, self-regulate, I guess we could use that phrase, then I think that's a massive advantage as well.
Yeah, one of the first points you mentioned there actually was you were talking about, I guess, the motivation, why people trade and the importance of having a motivation that can keep pushing you forward, being persistent, pushing through those challenges. I think the one factor that seems to catch a lot of traders out, especially at the beginning, is the amount of time and effort that it does actually take to reach a consistent level of success. And I think in your book, or one of your books, you talk about a concept of the J curve, which I thought was pretty cool. I haven't seen that anywhere else, but it makes a lot of sense. Can you share a little bit about the J curve and how that applies to traders?
Yeah, for sure. So two things. I'll come to J curve secondly, but I love it when people say about, as you said, it always seems a lot harder than we thought, because I do a lot of work over the years, or have done a lot of work over the years with new traders coming into banks and to prop groups particularly. And I normally get to kind of see them early on and then maybe later in the career. And if I see them after probably about, a year to 18 months, I kind of just have a bit of a check-in. I say, how's things? And they go, you know what, Steve, it's taken a lot longer than I thought it would do. And it's been a lot harder than I thought it would be. And I get that consistently. But yet, when you see those people at the beginning, almost on day one, it's almost like, yeah, do you know what? I'm a smart guy. I've got all these qualifications. I was captain of a football team. I've done this. I played chess. You can talk to me about biases and mistakes, but it's not going to happen to me, Steve. I'll be all right. Thanks anyway. So it's it is difficult for humans to kind of get a sense of how hard it's going to be. We all kind of got that slight optimism bias, which is good. Otherwise, we wouldn't turn up on day one of the course anyway. So, but it is interesting. So yeah, the J curve basically is, I think it's just a framework. And I observed this just when for about a year or so, I kind of went in house and spent a year, a bit more than that maybe, co-managing a team of about 50 prop traders. With a colleague of mine, and we basically just obviously got all their trading data and metrics, regularly. And I was that was my interest, so I kind of did a lot of analysis. And I just noticed that it was very common that early, as people went live, as we would call it, into trading, and particularly if you're trading in a prop trading group, you will have a desk cost. So you're gonna, as soon as you go live, you're now paying for your seat essentially. So you've got, if you have a shop, you've got some rent to pay. So you're paying rent essentially. Plus, obviously, every time you trade, there's a trading cost. So you're quite cost heavy early on. Plus, obviously, you're low in skill and you're low in experience, and your strategies probably aren't well tested. So you're going to lose more, you're going to make more mistakes, and you're kind of cost heavy. So what we noticed was there's a period where you're going below the zero line. So you're kind of dropping down. You're starting at zero essentially. You're dropping down below that to some level. And then over time, as your skill improves, and it really is a skill factor, what happens obviously is you start to make more successful trades. So your success ratio increases. You obviously can start to trade slightly bigger. So those bigger trades become, more profitable. And there comes a point where people get to break even. So now that's kind of the bottom part of that curve. And then also you come back up, ideally over time, into profitability. Having said that, the J curve, whilst in the book and when I draw it quite smooth. That's kind of an averaged out. It is a bit more lumpy than that. And you can certainly, once you get to break even, you can break through that and drop back down again for sure. But I think it gave people, when we were training them, just a general sense that, expect early on to be losing money. That's going to be normal. So we kind of normalized it for them. And in that particular model, we said, the goal here for you and for us is to help you to reduce the amount of money you're losing. So don't lose more than you have to, which is really important. And in a profit bit, it's because if that happens, you get sacked. So it's pretty important from that perspective. But also we wanted to try and see if we could put in place a training framework that allowed them to keep that process short. So to get to break even as fast as possible. So don't go too deep and don't be under the water for too long. They're the two variables that kind of really tend to affect people. And it was just nice having the data there and kind of seeing that coming through. And I say then what we saw over time was by improving our training and the way that we coached people and mentored them, we could basically make sure we kept that J curve nice and shallow, and we could keep it quite short for most people. So we got them to break even quite quickly, which psychologically obviously has a big impact.
Yeah. But what about traders then that don't have access to these trading programs and that kind of mentorship? What can they do to shortcut the process a little bit?
Yeah, well, this is something that really interests me because I think, or my experience, and I've done obviously a huge amount of work in the professional trading space, and I've done enough work with retail traders to get a flavour of that area, but there is a significant advantage to getting good training, good coaching, and good mentoring that you can't shortcut. So, for me, it's like if I wanted to go and learn how to play golf and get good at golf, I could go down the driving range today and start bashing a few balls around. And I could do that for years and years and years. And I could probably get marginally better by reading some books and watching some videos as well. But nothing is going to be as good as if I just went down to the driving range today and had a one-to-one session for 60 minutes or 90 minutes. And I did the same in maybe a couple of weeks' time. But if I could get that one-to-one session every day, then, my skill and ability is going to increase exponentially compared to somebody who's, doing a do-it-yourself job. So I think that the reality is you can't shortcut that. I think the coaching, the training, the mentoring, that is the shortcut. That's the performance accelerator. And that's what we worked hard on, was getting that done and doing it really well. So I think what people can do who aren't institutionalized as such is, my advice is always seek out a good training course. Get as much training as you can. Seek out a good coach or mentor, whatever your preference is. But the more you can do that, as well as getting the knowledge in fast and benefit from their experience, you're also getting the feedback. And I think that's the challenge for the person trading from home alone is you're getting the feedback loop, but only from your own perspective. So, so it's a bit like if you imagine two mountains and one person's climbing the mountain, the other person isn't on that mountain with them, but they're on their own mountain, but they can see across where that person is on their mountain. And so they can give perspectives that are very, very, very different. And I think that's the challenge when you're just at home on your own mountain is, you're having to go away and find your own way, but you can't always see what's coming up, what's around the corner, what's around the side of the mountain. So, but I think if you are in that situation, you've got to put a lot of time and effort, particularly into, your own development, your own training, and definitely, things like, reviewing your performance, both, in the short term, over time. So I think you've got to do a lot of that for yourself, but there are limitations.
I want to switch gears now to a topic that I know a lot of traders struggle with, whether they're beginners or, even the professional traders and the institutions, and that is taking losses and I guess an extension of that, drawdowns and managing drawdown periods. Why do you think it's so difficult for some traders to accept losses, take losses, that kind of thing?
Sure. Well, I think there's multiple factors at play. So I think it's quite complex. But if we look at it from a behavioural finance perspective, there's loss aversion as a bias, disposition effect, which has a kind of a risk seeking in situations of loss tendency. Nobody really likes to lose anyway. So we're kind of at the very basic level. Nobody's going to want to lose, and then you might have people with strong ego, so that's going to kind of be amplified. And then I think for some people, there can be ingrained through maybe childhood and into early adulthood, kind of beliefs or mindsets around, what does it mean to lose? So there can be some kind of deep-seated beliefs around, losing is bad, avoid losing at all costs, don't make mistakes, this kind of things. So I think, and you can get all of that in different quantities for different people. And then I think, the other key factor I always come back down to is it's just uncomfortable. It just feels uncomfortable having to, psychologically accept the fact we're going to take that loss. So, in the moment, even if conceptually we know it's the right thing to do, so we're kind of into a cognitive process, there's a strong emotional component which is uncomfortable, and that's in the body. And it's kind of whether people can kind of manage that. So, there's a lot going on when it comes to taking a loss. We do know that for many people, it gets easier over time. So there's an exposure effect to that, which is good. But it doesn't ever become easy, is my suggestion. I've got clients who've been trading 20, 25, 30 years plus, very experienced, very successful, still find it hard sometimes taking the losses as they do sometimes running the winners. So it's never easy, but I think it gets easier through practice. But I think one thing, a variable as such, which we do have large control over to make it easier or not, is the risk that you take. And certainly one thing I've seen in a lot of traders, particularly earlier in their careers, is risk basically has, is correlated to the stress response. And if you're taking more risk, you're going to get more stress response. If it's more stressful, it's more uncomfortable. So you can moderate how much stress you expose yourself to by also regulating how much risk you're taking. And if you imagine an inverted U curve, and then you have performance going vertically, and then we have risk going horizontally, there's for all of us a position size that's too small. Likewise, there's one that's too big. And what you're really looking for is what's the optimal size? That is, how big can I trade whilst also allowing me to feel and think in ways that enable me to be disciplined and to follow my process. And if you're too small or too big, then you'll get style drift, you'll get deviation away from that. There's a bit of a judgment call in that, and if in doubt, probably go slightly smaller than your kind of gut feel might tell you. So you've got a lot of that going on. I think, what's happened before is a big factor as well. If you're on a winning run versus a losing run, if you're making money, losing money, just had a big winning trade or a big losing trade. So your situational factor is also playing in to how easy or not it is in that moment to take that trade. So, there's so much stuff going on. And I think what it comes down to, again, and I use this model a lot, it's simple, but I think it's true, is there's in all challenging trading situations, in my experience, what's happening is there's some short-term discomfort. Running profits can be uncomfortable. We don't know how far it's going to go. Will it retrace? Will we lose what we've got? Taking a loss is uncomfortable. Getting back into the market after a losing trade can be uncomfortable. So we're in these moments of short-term discomfort. And then we've got a choice. Now, unfortunately, the instinctive choice for many people is, how do I make myself comfortable? So, the human condition has a tendency towards comfort. And so the way that we, in the moment, get comfortable with losses is we don't take them, because that's the most comfortable option. So we seek short-term comfort by not taking the loss. But of course, by doing that, we expose ourselves to the potential of long-term massive discomfort. But in those moments, we are, the brain, when there's a bit of a stress response, we're going very short-term. What do I need to do to feel comfortable now? So the opposite of that, and this is where I think the best traders get themselves to, is they develop skills, psychological skills, that enable them to maintain or to work with the short-term discomfort, i.e. they're noticing it's uncomfortable, and it is uncomfortable, yet they're able to stay with that discomfort. They're able to reduce the need to get rid of discomfort. And if we can if we can kind of tolerate some of that short-term discomfort, then that's where I think you get the long-term gain. So you have to develop through experience and through probably some training psychologically to find out a way for that you can get that balance right. But it means, that to be successful in trading, you have to learn how to tolerate that discomfort as it arises in the short term.
Yeah. Well, something that's kind of been growing in popularity over the years is this concept of mindfulness. Now, I know you've actually published a book on it and you've done a lot of work with it. And I think that's what you were kind of touching on in your comments there. So perhaps we can dig into that for a couple of minutes and talk about the implications of that to trading. Maybe we should start with a very basic question. What is mindfulness?
I've got a lot of interesting views on that question. So for mindfulness, in essence, if we go for the classical definition, this is a guy called John Kabat-Zinn, who's probably one of the world's leading mindfulness kind of experts. He would say it's about paying attention on purpose in the present moment. And then you're kind of doing it moment by moment. You are doing it intentionally, and in his kind of definition, also non-judgmentally. So whatever the experience is in the moment is what the experience is. So that's kind of, I guess, the classic definition. I prefer something probably a little bit lighter. And in lots of my work, I don't really even use the word mindfulness, but I use the word either awareness or noticing. So for me, in essence, mindfulness is about noticing what's happening while it's happening. And I think that's kind of what I come back down to. Now, mindfulness is interesting for many different reasons. One, there's some quite good research behind it around emotional regulation, stress response regulation, attentional regulation, which are all good skills for traders to have. But if we go back to discipline, which is always the one that, people always ask me about, how can I be more disciplined and so on? And, again, it's quite nuanced, but if we keep it basic, how do I, do what I want? How do I know what to do, but do what I should be doing in that moment? What stops people being disciplined is there'll be a thought, there'll be an emotion, there'll be an impulse, an urge, a sensation. There'll be something happening in their experience which is taking them away from where they want to be, from the action they want to be doing. Now, historically, people would go, okay, well, if you reflect on that, do your journaling, you can reflect on that, you can see where you went wrong, and over time will improve. And I believe that to some degree. What I don't find as easy from that, though, is, but how will I know the next time in that moment? And I think for me, what was interesting about mindfulness and why I kind of became interested in it and studied it was it gave a way of training the ability to notice what's happening while it's actually happening. Because if I want to self-regulate, I need to know it's happening in the first place. So I can't self-regulate something if I've got no awareness it's actually happening in that moment. So I think it's got, when I'm teaching it with clients, often what I'll talk about is let's build some awareness skills, or let's build some noticing skills, like now, just noticing sounds around you, or you might notice in this moment, what you can see in the room around you. You could notice in this moment points of contact between yourself and the chair and the floor. You could notice points of contact. So you can notice, sensations of breathing. So just building the skills of noticing, I think, is really valuable. And there's a great quote from Tom Basso, which I think's in either Market Wizards or New Market Wizards, where he talks about when he's trading well, he says there's a Tom Basso in the corner of the room watching the Tom Basso at the trading screen. And I love that kind of sense of perspective, what we call the observer self. And that essentially, I think that's the skill that mindfulness builds, is the observer self. So I'm noticing that I'm feeling the emotion of fear versus I'm afraid. I'm noticing my mind is thinking I shouldn't take this loss, but I'm noticing that that's the thought my mind is having. And I think once you can get into that, then you can trade. It's a bit like there's a guy called George Mumford in the US who does a lot of work in the NBA with mindfulness skills. And he talks about, you can be, there's a hurricane, but you're in the eye of the hurricane. So you can have all this crazy stuff going on around you, but your experience of it is very different. And I think that's where we get behavioral flexibility, where you can have an urge to go one way, probably in trading terms, the not useful way, but you can then have the flexibility to be aware of that and to make a different choice. So I think that's where it's got massive value for me.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting approach because, as traders, we've all heard of this idea of trading without emotion and don't let your emotions impact your trading and that kind of thing. But with the mindfulness and the awareness approach, you're really acknowledging that these things are existing inside you and you can therefore manage or react to those kind of things as they occur. But what kind of benefits do you actually see traders reaping once they look at this mindfulness and awareness of what's going on inside?
Well, the first thing is, and you touched on something, which is a really key point. The first thing that happens is there is a shift in the context of people's understanding of their experience. So for many people, we're operating in a frame of negative emotion, negative thinking, positive thinking. When you adopt a more of a noticing awareness approach, more of a mindful approach, when we're not using that language for a start. So, for me, everything is functional. Fear, if I was being attacked by somebody, fear would be a perfectly functional and a desired emotional state to experience. It may not be the same if I'm trading and I'm losing money at the same degree. However, I would argue actually probably still is functional. So all our thoughts, emotions, behaviors are functional based on the context. So I think once people realize that, that's helpful in itself. Once we start to recognize there's no need to get rid of thoughts and emotions, which again is a different way of thinking to maybe more traditional approaches, I think that frees people up. So you get what we call psychological flexibility once you begin to work with things as opposed to try and get rid of things. So, I often use the metaphor, imagine a beach ball and you hold it underwater. That's like trying to suppress an emotion. The ball's still there, you're using energy to hold it down, and when you let it go, it's going to come flying out. So suppression is tiring. It takes your mind away from the task that you're on, and it reduces your resources, your cognitive resources. So it's draining. Yeah. And it doesn't go anywhere, it's still there. As opposed to in a more mindful approach, we might, we notice the ball, it could be a pretty ugly beach ball, but we've got an ugly beach ball, we stick it on the water, and you know what, a gust of wind might come, the tide might change, that could be gone in a few seconds. But if I hang on to it and shove it under the water, I'm keeping it in place. So what happens with the mindfulness training is many things. I think psychologically, people get this kind of more flexible, bit more fluid approach, that they see things as kind of coming and going. Not getting so stuck with things as they arise. They often start to work with what's happening, so they're more willing to have an emotion, to have a thought or an urge, but not to have to get rid of it. And I think that's powerful because now we're into this is kind of it's uncomfortable, but I'm allowing it to be there, which is really powerful. At the brain level, so neurologically, what happens is there are some changes to the wiring in the brain. So there's structural and functional change around attention and focus. So that increases, which is good. But I think importantly, what's interesting is there is an increase in emotional regulation capacity and also stress regulation capacity. So people, when they get an emotional response or a stress response, they still get that, but at a lower level, so they're not as reactive. And I did a bit of work with some colleagues, some training out in the US. They were working with the US Marines teaching mindfulness skills. And they had this lovely phrase about moving from reactivity to being responsive. So responsive is about situational awareness. I'm aware of what's going on around me, in our terms, the markets. And then I've got behavioral flexibility. So I'm adjusting my behavior in line with what's going on around me. And I think that's a really nice framework to think about in trading is how do I build that situational awareness of self, others, and the environment? And mindfulness does that. And how do I get that behavioral flexibility so I can adjust my behavior? Because the thing about discipline is it's not about being rigid. I think that the notion of have a plan, follow a plan has some value, but the markets are dynamic. Sports matches change and you adapt the game plan. In combat, the battlefield changes and you adapt the battle plan. And in trading, I think rigidity of just following the plan rigidly in a changing environment, I think doesn't maximize return. So I think, you need that flexibility to adjust when it's the right time to adjust. And I think the deeper level of mindfulness that can come through is things like insight and wisdom. You kind of get a better understanding of yourself over time.
So what about it in the context of algorithmic trading then, where, quite a few of the examples you mentioned there sound like they're more about the execution of a system, whether it is systematic or discretionary, but algorithmic trading is really about, letting the computers do it. Does mindfulness still apply to traders or to algorithmic traders as well as other types of traders?
I think it can apply to anybody, and I think for all of us, just to function at our best in the modern world where we've got hyper distractions going on. We're very distractible, brains hyper aroused a lot of the time. attention spans are shrinking, that people are, in general, suffering more from anxiety and stress than ever. So I think mindfulness I'm not saying mindfulness is the cure by any means, but it can play a part in helping with that. One thing I found, and probably obviously most of my clients, the bias is towards kind of discretionary type trading, and probably a smaller number are algorithmic or very strongly systematic. But in that sample size, which is still pretty decent over the last 14 years, but there's still a lot of anxiety and worry and stress that goes on. If your system isn't performing, for many people that creates anxiety and stress, just the same as it would do for a discretionary trader. So, and one thing I've seen with some of the systematic guys that I've coached is the tendency to kind of dabble with the system. So they're kind of continually trying to back test it again, optimize it. It's a continual process. But that process is often more intense when they're losing money. So again, we're trying to get people to kind of understand, the probabilities and the mathematics and the long-term picture. Yet in the short term, when the system's not performing, that's still uncomfortable for many people. Even though it's a system and we know cognitively, we just got to let it do its thing to get the returns, there's still the part of us which knows the outcome in that moment isn't as good as we would like it to be. And that can tend us to maybe, make some changes or deviate or even turn the system off, which some people, have done. Which again, often, breaks that whole kind of flow. So I think, there's definitely a value in life in general for all people. And I think, for all of us, even in the performance area for trading, there's good value for the, for the algo guys as well.
Earlier you mentioned about traders becoming aware of, what's happening, the surroundings, their feelings, their back on the chair, all that kind of stuff. From a practical standpoint of view, how do they actually go about doing that? Is that like a really challenging process? Is there an easy way to do it? Can you recommend an approach for people who want to look into this further?
Well, I think the skill of noticing is a very simple thing that you can practice on your own. So I mean, you could, I mean, in a classical mindfulness practice, so that the classic mindfulness practice, kind of the 101 would be, you'd focus on your breathing. You pay attention to your breathing. If your mind gets distracted, you refocus back onto breathing. But again, that can be challenging. So I would often say to people, right, just find a few minutes each day, 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes. Just do some slow controlled breathing, maybe 4 seconds in, 4 seconds out, or 5 in, 5 out, something like that. And during that time, just focus in on the breathing. And if you get distracted, come back to breathing, or count breaths. In, out, that's 1. In, out is 2. How many breaths can you do before the mind wanders? But just to kind of basically train the concentration skills, because the noticing is also dependent on how good your concentration is. So you can build concentration by kind of very simple practices like that. Noticing could be as simple as, next time you're outside somewhere, take 60 seconds. What's that? 5 sounds you can hear, 5 things you can see. Just kind of in that moment, bringing some awareness. But again, this is where to train the skill, what you want really is, as the trader, is you don't want to be practicing noticing while you're at the trading screen. You want to be trading at the trading screen. But what you want to have is better noticing skills. So the analogy I always use is, if my job was shifting furniture, what I might do is I might go to the gym 2 or 3 times a week to build the strength up so that when I'm doing my day job, it's easier. So what I would say to traders is, a lot of the mental training that I would teach people, and mindfulness might be one of those techniques, or noticing could be a technique, but I would encourage them to spend a few minutes each day doing that away from the screens. What you're doing is you're developing the muscles and the networks in the brain, then allow that to happen naturally without you needing to do it. So literally, like, I use the muscle analogies. We're building like mental fitness in the same way we would build physical fitness. But we're not doing it at the screen. We're getting the benefits at the screen. We're doing the work away from the screen.
Right, okay. So you're saying that if you practice it enough times in a conscious manner, then over time the subconscious will take over and you don't even need to really try? Is that kind of... Yeah.
I mean, you're just building. It's like any skill, isn't it? If you practice being... If you work hard at being happy every day, you'll just find you're kind of happier over time. By nature. Likewise, if you do the same thing for being miserable, you can do the same thing. So whatever we practice is what we become. That's how I always think about things. So if there's an outcome you want, if I want to be better at noticing and that's the outcome that I want, what I've got to think about is what are the skills or what's the progressions I need to go through that improve the skill of noticing. And then I've got to kind of commit to that. And that's where your practice comes in. Now, typically, again, just as a guideline for people, a lot of the research in mindfulness is done over an 8-week period. And then typically using sort of 10 to 15 minutes per day in those kind of, in those studies. So, but I think if you're doing it over a longer period of time, 8 to 12 minutes is quite a nice sweet spot for people. But for most of my clients, they're not, not all of them want to engage that deeply. So I go, look, can you find 2 to 5 minutes a day where you could do a breathing practice or do a noticing practice or do a bit of a visualization practice? So let's just do small but regular. Because for some people, they're just not, they're not in a place where they want to do more than that. But for all of us, we can get that 2 to 5 minute slot, and maybe we do it twice a day. One early, one later.
Yeah. Yeah, I really love that quote you just said. Whatever we practice, we become. That's really cool. I love that. I also wanted to mention as well, I think, don't you have in the back of your Trader Mind book, I think you have an 8-week program. Is that right?
Yeah, so basically for the Trader Mind book, all I did was, there were some very kind of well-researched and well-structured mindfulness programs. And so what I wanted to do was, if you kind of design your own stuff, that's good and you can make it, it can be quite nice. But what you don't have is the research behind it that it's probably going to work. So I took kind of the core essence of the standard 8-week Trader Mind, of the 8-week mindfulness program, and just adapted it a bit more for some kind of trading related exercises and activities, and I've kind of done some shifting and changing in some of the practices, but the basic nuts and bolts are based on a foundation of well proven research and hundreds of thousands of people that have been through those programs. So and again, yeah, it's there really because people say, well, what do I, I've read the book, now what do I do? Well, I would say read the book and then do the 8-week program. Because, and again, my mindfulness teacher who I learned from many years ago has this great phrase, which is, if you want to get good at mindfulness and you've got 10 minutes, don't spend 10 minutes reading about mindfulness, spend 10 minutes doing some mindfulness. Yeah. So it's one of those things that I think, and I see this in the trade with my clients, is because they're quite often, intellectual, academic, cognitive people. They love reading about, the research into mindfulness, and they spend hours reading about it, and then they go, oh yeah, but I didn't get my practice in. No, don't do the reading, or half the reading and then do half of it practice. And again, you can only know this by doing it. And if anyone's ever played sport, you'll be able to relate. You learn a lot about sport and how well you play sport and how to get better while you're playing it. It's very experiential. Mindfulness is the same. A lot of the learning and the insight comes from doing it, and you kind of, all the questions you've got about mindfulness, you could get in a book, but you'll get them answered if you just do enough practice. And it's just kind of really almost, and that's why some of the apps are quite good. There's a Headspace is a popular one, Calm is a popular one, Insight Timer, because they're making it accessible for people to kind of get into it and give it a go. But that's my advice is, download an app and just get into it and experience it, and then see. And then if you like it and you want more, then do the reading. But don't do too much reading first, because it's just concept. It's like understanding how to run. You can understand the mechanics of running, but you won't get better at running. You've got to go out and run. Yep,
exactly. All right. Well, just before we wrap up for our chat today, I just want to ask you quickly about performance coaching a bit more, because at the start you mentioned that it was almost a critical factor, or one of the critical factors in getting people through the J-curve quickly and improving their performance. Now, you seem to coach people across the spectrum. Do you find that there are any ideal candidates or specific stages or levels of experience that really suit traders more than others?
For my own specific coaching, so let's kind of call it more on the performance and the psychology side, I don't do a lot of work with newer traders. I just find at the beginning of the learning curve, the things that are most valuable, obviously, are the basic skills, the knowledge, getting a strategy. The same as, if you were playing football, and you had to take a penalty. Before you can take a penalty in a World Cup final under high levels of pressure, you've got to be able to kick a football in the first place. So you could learn the psychology of penalty taking as a new football player, but it's not going to be that helpful, or not as helpful as learning how to kick a ball and then take a penalty in the first place. So I think the progression is, for newer traders, I think basic skills, knowledge, strategy has to be the core. Then I think with a basic understanding of the psychology, so there's a proportion of that amount, which again is probably best done on a training course, maybe even reading a book, that kind of knowledge early on. As you progress through, as your skills and your knowledge and the experience becomes greater, then I think the role of my coaching as such plays a much bigger part, because you already know what to do and how to do it. You've already proven you can do it. You've maybe got some results behind you. And then what you're looking for is, how do we, reduce the impact of the downside? How do we leverage the upside? How do we get consistency over time? And I think that's far more psychological than anything else. And you're looking at more nuanced games around, can we shift the physiology? What role could, mindfulness or noticing or breathing or regulation approaches, what can they play, which are making maybe a smaller difference, but at the top end, small differences have a massive impact. Whereas lower down, reading an hour on mindfulness versus reading an hour on, market knowledge or trading strategy might not be as useful. So I think in general, for me, the ideal client is somebody who is probably experienced in trading, probably been doing it for at least a couple of years, depending on their background, and is massively motivated to want to get better. And that's the key thing. I've been so lucky. I've had some amazing clients from all over the world, all trading in different ways. But when I work with a client, I think, wow, this is special. It's because they're so committed to wanting to get better. And I think, and again, if we go back to that earlier question, what does it take to be successful in trading? I think that's probably a lot of what it's about. It's about a massive commitment to try. It's what we call mastery. You're trying to master something. You're never going to master it. You're just on this ongoing journey of trying to keep getting better, keep getting better, keep getting better, keep getting better. And if you enjoy that kind of approach, and you enjoy the learning that comes from that, and you enjoy the challenge that comes with that, then I think that makes it great for you as a trader. And if I ever get to work with a person like that, then it makes it phenomenal, as a coaching experience.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we've really only just scratched the surface of a huge topic. So if people wanted to learn more from you or get in touch with you, how can they do that?
Yeah, probably just through the website, Andrew, is probably easiest, which is www.performanceedgeconsulting.co.uk, or just on LinkedIn. It's probably that's where people tend to find me as well. So just Steve Ward on LinkedIn, or Steve Ward Trader Coach. That kind of probably bring me up. Not too many Steve Ward Trader Coaches in the world. So yeah, they're the best places. Yeah, and then obviously there's the books, and there's a few CDs, some sort of mental training stuff on the website as well. So it's and you can sign up. I think I'm just going to start maybe later this year a newsletter as well. I had one in the past, but kind of flagged off a little bit. So I'm just trying to do the newsletter in a bit more of a professional way. So if you sign up, there might be a little newsletter coming out over the next few months as well.
All right, cool. Look forward to that. So I'll just I'll have links to your website and the books and all that kind of stuff on my website as well, so people can find that easily. So thanks a lot for your time today, Steve. I really enjoyed chatting to you. Was there anything else that you wanted to mention before we wrap this up?
No, I don't think so. Nothing. Thanks for your questions, and it was always good for me to be asked the questions and think about my answers again, because it's good to kind of to revisit some of these themes and. Yeah, I mean, like you say, it's such a massive topic, and it. I'm hoping one day someone will say to me, Steve, you've got 2 weeks, 14 days in a row. Do your best, tell us all you know. But as it is, it's normally 30 minutes, an hour, hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours. So it's But thanks for the invitation anyway. Yeah,
would 14 days be enough?
Yeah, well, you know what? I reckon I could do longer, but I think it would be a good challenge. Good starting point.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks a lot, Steve, again for having a chat today, and it was really great speaking to you. So thanks again, and I wish you all the best.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Andrew. Thank you.
All right. Cheers. Bye. Okay. Well, that's it for this episode. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show. Come on over to bettersystemtrader.com. That's where you'll find all the previous episodes, all the transcribes, all the show notes, and all the free weekly trading tips. bettersystemtrader.com.